介绍一下。今天的这个活动的主题是介绍巴哈伊信仰。那我先简单的跟大家分享一下几点。第一个就是我如何接触到巴哈伊信仰。这个是这个10多年前，我大女儿5岁的时候上幼儿园，那她的班上一个小朋友，他们是巴哈伊信仰者，他们是美国人。请进呀，请进呀。我们刚刚开始，我们大家在刚刚自我介绍了，你要不要介绍一下自己？你叫什么名字？怎么知道古语的？来过多少次了？
大家好，我叫罗晓，我是Prashant和Michelle的朋友。他们邀请我说Prashant今天来介绍，然后我就想，我也可以向他学习很多东西，还可以认识新朋友，所以很高兴就来了。
欢迎，
谢谢。
OK， 我就是我们在讲我是如何接触到巴哈伊信仰的。这就是10多年前我的大女儿上幼儿园 kindergarten， 她班上有一个加拿大来的一个小女孩是美国人，她的爸爸妈妈邀请我的孩子到他们家参加儿童美德素质学习班。这个等一下Prashant会讲到。这个巴哈伊他在社区服务的活动当中有一项很重要的就是儿童美德素质班。那当时虽然我没有什么宗教信仰，但是我看他们儿童班的内容非常好。第一个是美德，要乐于助人，要有爱心。这个学给孩子学没坏处。另外一点呢，它是一个平衡的美德。它这个美德不是偏激的，是一个非常平衡的。比如说你要正义，要勇敢，那你正义，你要对别人要正义，对自己也要正义。你同时要学会勇于保护自己。自己受到不公正的对待的时候，特别我的2个女儿都是女孩子，她要如何有这个勇气来保护自己，是不是？所以我觉得这种平衡的美德教育是对孩子是非常好的。另外一个，它有很多素质教育，比如说坚韧不拔，我们做事情的时候，另外一个超脱，这个 attachment， 比如说超脱或者超然，我们做事情的时候，只要尽在自己眼前的努力就好。对于结果，我们不能控制的，我们不会去为他，我高考没考上啊，考试没考100分呢，我们不会去担心那些事情，因为我们要有超然的态度，对结果超然，重在努力。而且我们的目的不是跟别人比，我们是自己尽量的去学习更多的学识，提高自己，将来服务社会。我觉得，小孩子5岁小孩学这个东西，我40岁的人都不知道，是吧？我觉得，这些东西对孩子的成长太有帮助了。就刚刚 Cindy 谈到的那本书，我的那本书里面其实谈到了很多，就是我培养孩子的经验。那其中我培养孩子的这10几年的经验，其实就是都看着孩子在这个巴哈伊的这个很多教导下，然后这个孩子的思想更加开明，碰到问题努力思考，他们有很好的能力，再加非常好的素质。所以这是我的这个 introduction。另外一个，我想第2点我要讲的就是这个巴哈伊信仰在中国的情况。这个在中国的传播，这个巴哈伊信仰大概很早的时候，就大概解放前就已经传播到了中国。这个蔡德贵教授是这个山东大学北京大学，他是中国研究巴哈伊信仰的这个权威。他这个最早的时候，就是孙中山，前总统大总统也会见过巴哈伊的这个传教，可以说是传教人马萨路特呀，而且对这个巴哈伊的这个天下大同的这个信念，团结对这种信念非常感兴趣，而且要求这个马特路特说以后可不可以多给我寄一些这方面的材料。前清华校长曹云祥也是翻译了大量的巴哈伊著作在中国，这是解放前在中国的巴哈伊在中国的发展。那最近这个大陆对巴哈伊的研究也是这刚刚出版的全套的对巴哈伊 研究、信仰的研究。这个是中国社会科学院世界宗教研究所、巴哈伊研究中心和北京大学巴哈伊翻译文献翻译与研究中心、山东大学巴哈伊研究所、广东大学巴哈伊研究所联合推出的对于巴哈伊文献的这个研究和这个作为一个新兴宗教的一个研究所以这个那时间关系，我具体的我就不介绍了这次。那今天我们非常高兴有机会请到Professor Loyalka 来给我们分享这个巴哈伊信仰。Professor Loyalka 是斯坦福大学的教授，是 Department of Education。他的简历非常长，我就时间关系，我们就略掉不谈了，就直接开始哈，热烈掌声欢迎。
谢谢大家。Should I speak in the microphone? It's okay. I'm going to speak English because Rebecca Rongal, you didn't tell me I should speak Chinese.
Yeah, English is fine.
So I will try to speak slowly and clearly. I can speak Chinese if something is not clear. Please always feel free to ask any questions you like at any time.
How did you learn Chinese?
Michelle and I, we lived in China for many years, about 12 years for me, about 14 years for her. And we met in China the first day I came to China. So China is a very special place for us. And our first child, she grew up in China. Our second child was born in Beijing. We lived in Guangdong, in Xi'an, and in Beijing. And most of my research is about China now. So I do work on education policy in China. So I research how to improve the quality of education, how to improve the inequalities in education. In rural areas, for example, we'll look at how to help children to go to school, to do better in school, how to improve their nutrition. And also, I study higher education, university education in China. So I frequently go back and forth from China to here. It's a pleasure to be here today. This is the first time I've been here at the book club. I've heard many wonderful things about it from Rebecca. As she said, my background is in education, but I'm going to talk about a topic that I'm not a professional expert in, but that I've had a lot of personal life experience with. In the Baha'i faith, we don't have any clergy. We don't have any priests or people who are officially in the role of introducing the Baha'i faith to other people. So I'm just an ordinary member of the Baha'i faith, and whatever I say, maybe it's right, maybe it's not right. I'm just joking. I'm going to try to be faithful to what I think the Baha'i faith is about, but it's still my interpretation. So please take what I say with a grain of salt, and other people who know about any of these topics, please feel free also to add your understanding. So let me start. I will try to first put this in slide mode. Great. Okay. So what I would like to do today is give you an introduction to the Baha'i faith, and this is not working. Do you have another clicker, or? I can stand over here if it's okay with the microphone. Okay, can you hear me okay if I talk from here?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to basically tell you about several aspects of the Baha'i faith. So first of all, what is the Baha'i faith? Second, what are some of its main ideas? Third, what do members of the Baha'i faith do day to day? And then last, briefly, what are the origins of the Baha'i faith? And I'm going to only briefly talk about the origins because Rebecca had asked that I also bring a copy of a documentary that explains more of the origins of the Baha'i faith. So I'm going to talk, I hope, for about 30 minutes, and then the documentary will be about 45 minutes. After that, I hope we can have questions and answers and so forth. Okay, so let me start with what is the Baha'i Faith. I'm going to give you a couple of definitions. So the first definition is the Baha'i Faith is a system of knowledge, the purpose of which is to transform the individual and also to build a harmonious, materially and spiritually prosperous world civilization. So there's a lot in that sentence and in that definition, just to take away that it's about individual transformation and also collective transformation. The second definition, and I found this from the BBC, online, is that the Baha'i Faith is one of the youngest of the world's major religions. And I think when I see the word religion, because I was not a Baha'i for most of my life, I came from a family that was mostly Hindu. I grew up in the United States. My father, as a scientist, was very agnostic, so he didn't necessarily believe in religion. So for me, what was really important when I met the Baha'i Faith was understanding what was meant by religion. For me, that's a very important topic. And I was surprised to learn that the Baha'i Faith has a very different idea of religion than what I think is there in most different faiths and traditions. So the Baha'i definition is that religion consists in the necessary relationships deriving from the relationships of things. Now that can be a little bit of a confusing sentence, but my understanding of it is that the Baha'i Faith, or any religion, helps you to understand the relationships between different things in real life. So whether it's the relationship between physical ideas or spiritual ideas, the goal of religion is to help you bridge and bring that understanding. So that's the idea from the Baha'i Faith about religion. Incidentally, the Baha'i Faith gives the exact same definition to science and to nature and to love. And in different parts of the Baha'i writings, there's many Baha'i writings, but in different parts there are these definitions of these 4 different things, and they're the same definition. For me, what that says is that really the purpose of science, the purpose of how we understand nature, is to be in the same way that we understand religion. And indeed, there's other aspects, I think, of the Baha'i Faith where when we think of religion, we are supposed to think of it also like laws of the world, laws of spirituality. So in the world today, we, I think, all admit that there are physical laws. There are things like gravity. For example, if we know the law of gravity and we know other aspects of friction and so forth, we can build a rocket that can go into outer space. Knowledge of physical laws helps us. In the same way, if we know about the fact that musical notes are created by a disturbance of air molecules, then we can understand what those different ways of disturbing air molecules, what the result of that is, how that results in musical notes, and how that creates music. So by understanding these physical laws, and in fact mastering them, it gives us a kind of freedom and power. And I think that's the purpose of religion in this sense in the Baha'i Faith, that it helps us understand spiritual laws so that we can empower ourselves and so that we can change society. Furthermore, in the Baha'i Faith, religious belief should not contradict science and reason. In the Baha'i Faith, it says very clearly, if there's established science and religion goes against that established science, then that religion is superstition, and it should be done away with. Also, if religion becomes a cause of disunity, then religion is also not good, and we should not have it. So any religion which is not a cause of love and unity is no religion, is another way of thinking about how the Baha'i Faith views religion. Another thing is that the Baha'i Faith claims that true religious knowledge has always come throughout history from an invisible source. And different traditions have different names for that invisible source. So some traditions call it God. I think more in the Eastern traditions we might say Tian or Dao. And an example of that would be, for example, from the Dao De Jing, right? Dao Ke Dao Fei Chang Dao, Ming Ke Ming Fei Chang Ming. This you know very well, right? It's a similar idea expressed in the Baha'i writings. So the Baha'i writings say that which we imagine is not the reality of God. He, the unknowable, the unthinkable, is far beyond the highest conception of man. So we can't even imagine what that invisible source is. So there's no need to argue about it. Sometimes different groups argue about what is that thing. Baha'i faith says, forget arguing, you can't imagine it. You don't know what it is, it's invisible. It's beyond us. So if that invisible source is beyond us, how do we access it? Well, the Baha'i faith says the religious knowledge that comes to humanity has historically been given through great teachers that come from time to time, from age to humanity. Now, Confucius said something similar. He said that every 500 years or so, there's a great teacher that comes. And this is a similar concept in the Baha'i faith. Who are some of these great teachers that have come throughout history? So, the Baha'i faith says there are many that we don't even know about in history that have been lost in time. But some of them that we can see are Abraham from Judaism, Krishna, Moses, Zoroaster from Zoroastrian religion, Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, and then in this day the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Now, there are also, again, I just want to emphasize other great teachers in the history of humanity. In the Baha'i conception, China has had many great teachers, some of them lost to history that we don't know that well. Confucius, for example, again, said that his knowledge that he had was given to him by previous great teachers. And so we definitely recognize Confucian thought as being one of those great world-shaping thoughts that's affected humanity. So these different great teachers, this is a direct quote from the Baha'i writings, they're universal educators. And the fundamental principles they have laid down are the causes and factors of the advancement of nations. So Baha'is believe that whenever you have a great teacher come, for example, Buddha, that his teachings eventually not only change people's hearts and minds, but they eventually change civilization. They give rise to new civilization. So you can see how Buddhism influenced India, how it influenced China, how it influenced Japan, and other parts of East Asia, even to this day. And these different traditions, they use different language because, of course, in different periods of time, in different places, there are different languages. And they've called these great teachers by different names. So in Buddhism, they say a Buddha will come from age to age. In Christianity and Judaism, they would say prophet. In Islam, messenger. In Hinduism, they would say avatar. But these are all different types of names for a great teacher that comes from age to guide humanity. And the Baha'i faith emphasizes that there are two sides to these great teachers. So I think in China there's a Chengyu, and I don't know it and I'm embarrassed, but that there are two sides to everything, right? So the two sides of these great teachers is one, that they have an essential unity. From one perspective, they're all the same. And I'll explain that in a second. The second is they have differences. And those differences are due to the needs and requirements of the time in which they live. So let me talk about side one. So this is the side of essential unity. So there's an analogy that the Baha'i faith uses to try to talk about why all of these great teachers are really one. So it talks about this unknowable, invisible essence, you know, this God or Tao, as being like the sun, very unreachable, far in the sky. But that these great teachers are like a perfect mirror that comes from time to time to reflect that sun to humanity. And if you look at the mirror itself, this mirror here, for example, is square. Another one in another time might be circular. Another might be a triangle. So outwardly, the mirrors, they look different. But the sun that they reflect is the same sun. And maybe even those mirrors reflect a little more or a little less sun based on what the human being needs at that time. But in essence, they're the same sun. Again, that same sunlight is coming just in different amounts according to the needs of humanity. So that's why in the Baha'i faith they say the divine religions in reality are one, though in name they differ. And therefore for a Baha'i to be really a seeker of truth, there's this concept that you have to look at the light or the truth no matter from what source it's coming. So all Baha'is have been asked to look for truth with their own eyes. And even when they have children, as they grow up, they don't automatically become Baha'is. They have to themselves, when they're of age of maturity, choose to become Baha'is because they themselves think it's true. So I think that's a unique feature of this faith. Okay, so just a little bit more on the same topic. So in the station of unity, these great teachers are regarded as one soul in the same person. And on the other side, they each have a distinct individuality, a definitely prescribed mission, and their own limitations. Okay. So let me just skip ahead. So the basic bedrock, or the basic foundation of Baha'i belief about religion in general, is that religious truth is not absolute. It does not mean that, for example, whatever a great teacher taught today will always be true forever. But rather, religious truth is relative according to the needs of the age. So in that sense, you could think of all of religion as being brought to you by teachers in different grades in the same school. You have a first grade teacher that teaches you first grade math, and then a second grade teacher that teaches you second grade math, and so forth. You should never say if you're in that school that my second grade teacher is better than my first grade teacher because look at the more complicated math she taught me or he taught me. But rather, they all have a common purpose, these teachers in the same school. They're all there to guide humanity forward, to learn and to grow and to develop. Okay. So that's my introduction to the Baha'i faith and the concept of religion. So what are some of the main ideas or principles or teachings of the Baha'i faith? So I've listed some of them. There's a lot of Baha'i principles, and the reason is because there's hundreds of volumes, hundreds of books. I was admiring how Rebecca carried this suitcase full of 5 volumes of translated writings. In reality, there are about 500 volumes worth of writings of the Baha'i faith. And they have many, many principles, but these are some of the main ones. They include the oneness of humankind, the independent investigation of truth, the harmony of science and religion, the equality of women and men, the elimination of all kinds of prejudice, whether it's racial prejudice, religious prejudice, class prejudice, universal education, the idea that everyone should receive an education, and a suitable education. The idea that the world should also have a universal language that's in addition to the language that we already speak as native speakers. Because the idea here is that if people were to go to different countries but speak the same language, no one would feel like a stranger. It would promote unity. The last one of my favorite on this list is spiritual solutions to economic problems. So we have a lot of, I'm an economist by training, we have a lot of different ideas about how to solve problems, for example, of inequality and poverty. And some of those solutions work very well, but we also need spiritual solutions to solve some of those problems. We need goodness and altruism from people who are already very wealthy, to have a desire to give back to society, a desire to give back to the poor. We need laws in the countries that are just, that equitably distribute resources. And to do that, we need a spiritual mindset, not just a material one. This is a pretty long list already, and you're lucky I'm not going to go through each of them. I'm just going to go through the first one, the oneness of humankind, because I think it's the most essential principle of the Baha'i faith, and it will already take a long time to talk about that one. So let me just go into depth about that one. And I'll just start with this quote, which I really liked, which said, "There is a perfect brotherhood underlying humanity." And I think the meaning of that is subtle, because I think it speaks to the idea that potentially humanity has that potential for unity. Right? Already it's there. Already we can recognize in the Baha'i perspective that all humanity can be unified as one family. Now, aspects of that principle of the oneness of humankind is, like I just said, everyone is part of the human body, but also that every individual is noble and unique. So this idea of unity is not supposed to take away individuality. It's not supposed to take away the beauty of the differences that you have as an individual, or your nobility, or your sense of agency. Rather, all of these different individuals together have a common purpose, and they can work together under a similar set of principles to achieve an ever-advancing material and spiritual civilization. And all are entitled to enjoy the benefits of that civilization. So we're not just building it for others, we're building it for ourselves. There's an analogy that's frequently mentioned in the Baha'i writings that talks about how the body politic, that means the world of humanity, is like a human body, like a human organism. And in that, every cell in that body, there's billions of them, of course, they're each their own individual cell. They have their own role, they have their own function, but they never truly fulfill their role and function until they work with the other cells of the human body. That's when that individuality really shines. And through greater and greater levels of complexity, when those cells work together, then we see that that body functions very well and is healthy. When those cells don't work together, we see that that body starts to get sick and maybe die. This is an analogy for humanity. If the different nations of the world, if the different peoples were to come together and realize their oneness, they could work together in a type of unity and diversity that would enable everyone to thrive. That's the major concept in the Baha'i faith. That requires, of course, that humanity has to eliminate all kinds of prejudices. And I think that's maybe a surface requirement, just a beginning requirement of getting to that unity. Now, a lot of people think, well, maybe this is impossible. This is so difficult to do. It sounds like a very big dream. I think it's important to realize that dream has been talked about in every tradition, most notably in China, very frequently as this Da Tong Shijie, right? This beautiful world that one day humanity will be able to build towards. And I would venture that one of the ideas in the Baha'i faith is really thoughtful, is that we have had unity in small layers that have gotten more complex over time. So maybe 10,000 years ago, unity was limited to the family, right? And families between them didn't necessarily work together as much. And then at some point, there became more unity between families, and we had tribes. But then you had fighting between tribes. And then something again happened where tribes started to have unity, and we had higher levels of organization like city-states and eventually nations. So in the Baha'i conception, this idea of world unity is really just the next stage in the evolution of humankind. And maybe if we had asked people, I don't know, 4,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, even in China or in other countries, could you have unity with that other kingdom over there? They would say, no, no, never. It's impossible. And so the Baha'i faith, through this example, is trying to get at that idea that things that seem impossible, after the course of hundreds of years, become more realistic. And then to complicate things, the principle of the oneness of humankind in the Baha'i faith is not just supposed to be a vague idea, where everybody starts to cooperate harmoniously together. Even though that's beautiful and nice, it doesn't stop there. It talks about an organic change in the structure of society, a change such as the world has not experienced. So it's not just talking about everyone getting along, it's talking about institutions changing, talking about how people relate to each other changing, talking about how the world is organized essentially changing. And there's a lot in the Baha'i writings about what that would look like. Just to give you a foretaste of that, there's a writing by Abdul Baha, who is one of the central figures of the Baha'i faith, where he talks about 7 candles of unity that humanity would eventually begin to move towards. So he talks about unity in the political realm. When countries put aside political differences, even their armaments, and start to work together, then they have a unity of thought and world undertakings. But he also talks about unity in religion, unity of races, unity of language, and there's many other levels of unity as well. So it's not a single dimension of unity, it's multifaceted, and they're meant to work and feed into each other. And I think, I've said a lot of things that sound, again, very big and very idealistic, but I think the Baha'is in the Baha'i faith do not believe that's a very simple task to do. A lot of effort is required. A lot of reasoning is required on the part of people. As part of that, a very small part, Baha'is are asked every day to study writings and to reflect on, act on them. Writings such as this one that help strengthen that motivation and behavior towards world unity. So this one is one of my favorite. It says, "Do not be content with showing friendship in words alone. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path." And so Rebecca, in the introduction, she talked a little bit about her daughters and how it would be great if a 5-year-old would learn these things. My daughter, I'm very proud of her at age 3, just a few months ago, she told me at night when we were sleeping together, she said, "Daddy, I want to give a talk." So I said, "Okay, what kind of talk do you want to give?" She said, "Well, let me start." So she said, "Our hearts have virtues." This is from a 3-year-old. "And we have to show them forth. We have to show them forth." And, she talked like that for 10 minutes without stopping. I recorded it. I was so shocked. But just to say, I think continual exposure to these kinds of ideas really has a profound effect on you. And it makes you not perfect by any means. I am the furthest from perfect in this room, but it makes you improve. It makes you reflect and improve, and I think it carries people forward and carries families forward and civilization forward. Okay. So now let me go to the idea of what do members of the Baha'i faith do. So I think you can already guess that it's about individual transformation, really how to change ourselves, and also about collective transformation. So in individual transformation, some of the practices that Baha'is are engaged in are studying these writings that I've shown you, some of them, to practice what's in those writings, which really includes a whole set of universal virtues that we all agree on. There's prayer, there's constant reflection and meditation, and I think really importantly, there's service. Because even though I split things into individual transformation and collective transformation, really the two are very linked. In the Baha'i conception, an individual can't really change unless they're contributing to the welfare of the whole. And the whole can't change without the effort of the individual. So this is one of my, I think, favorite quotes that talks about this principle. It says, be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age you live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. So I think this quote really tells me not just about behavior, but attitude. Like, I think about in my work, am I doing my work because I'm concerned with the needs of the world? Am I concerned about the needs of my community? When I'm thinking about how to educate my children, am I concerned about that, or am I not? So again, a reminder to be constantly connecting my individual change with that of the world around me. At a collective level, what is happening in the Baha'i faith? So the Baha'i faith does have a world international administration. Just very briefly, there are local and international administrative bodies. They're democratically elected. In those elections, there's no campaigning. There's a focus on humility and service. No individual has power. Like I said before, there are no clergy or priests in the Baha'i faith, so no individual can tell another individual, you have to do this, you have to do that. Things are decided in groups through consultation and spiritual principles. That's how the Baha'i faith is administered. That's on a world level, but Baha'is are also very much involved in community building in our local communities. So we're trying to create right now, as a worldwide Baha'i community, an environment in which every human being, doesn't matter if you're a Baha'i or not a Baha'i, we don't try to make any distinctions, but where every human being is welcome to contribute to the betterment of society. And the second thing that's really an essential part of that is to create a system of capacity building. Because I, for one, feel like I have a lot to learn about how to contribute to my community, how to contribute to society. So we have a series of activities and courses and trainings that help people to do that. And the whole idea is to promote a way of thinking, studying, and acting that lets us all walk together on a common path of service. No one saying, oh, I'm ahead of you, oh, look how far back you are, but everyone to walk together. Because we're facing a very complicated world, very complicated issues. How do we walk together to improve the communities we live in? So these kinds of activities, let me just give you an example of a few of them, include these circles of study. These are participatory study circles where people get together, they study writings about different topics, and then more importantly, they engage in acts of service. Small acts of service in the beginning, and then more complicated as you learn more, that are of immediate use to the society around you. We also have meetings that are called devotional meetings, where we pray and read holy writings from different backgrounds, different religions together. Invite everyone in the community to do that together. And the idea of that is that that strengthens the bonds of our hearts together, to have a spiritual mindset together. Number 3, we have classes about moral virtues and character building for children. And finally, we have junior youth groups. These are groups dedicated for the education of junior youth, but also for them to have a space where they can begin to talk about meaningful things, their meaningful contribution. Here it's for ages 11 through 14, about how they can begin to do service for others. So I think that's really important, because I think in society today we often don't think of this age group as having that capacity. We think, oh, they're going to be teenagers, how terrible. But here, the idea of these junior youth groups in the Baha'i conception is to help people to release their potential and think that they have that promise. In addition to these kind of activities at the community level, the whole idea is that these activities will raise human capacity, so eventually there's enough human resources to do more meaningful, larger scale projects of social action. So the Baha'i faith is very geographically widespread. In India, in different parts of the world, when you have enough people that have been through this sort of set of trainings, what you have is you have people who can build schools, or they can build hospitals, or they can do microcredit. They can essentially begin forming a lot of new institutions that are lacking in their respective jurisdiction. What people do in India would be very different from what we would do in Silicon Valley, but the concept is the same. Okay, and the last thing the Baha'is are really engaged in these days is discourses in the sort of meaningful issues of society. So either through my own reading and interactions with my colleagues, my ability to come to this kind of book club, one of the main things that Baha'is try to do is try to engage meaningfully with others in discussions about how to apply spiritual principles to solve social problems. This is one of my last slides before we go into origins. I just wanted, and I probably should have done this at the beginning, just to give you an idea of where all of these activities are happening. The Baha'i Faith is established today in about 250 countries. There's about 2,100 ethnic groups and tribes that are part of the Baha'i Faith. Different members of those tribes are part of the Baha'i Faith. The Baha'i Faith worked with the United Nations very early on. I think it was the first NGO or nonprofit organization to have an official status at the United Nations. So this sort of widespread geography and working at the world stage is something that you can see from this that Baha'is really care about. Okay, my last few slides are about origins, and then we can jump either into questions or directly into the movie. So briefly, what are the origins of the Baha'i Faith? Well, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, his name is Baha'u'llah. We're going to watch a documentary about his life. He was born to a noble family in Persia in 1817, very similar to Buddha. He did not attend normal school and had only a very basic education, but already from very early on in his teenage years, he was known for his service to the poor, to the needy around him, and became known as the father of the poor. Now in 1863, Baha'u'llah announced that he was one of humanity's great teachers that would bring in a new stage of development of humanity that would be essentially the long-awaited age of peace and harmony. And in saying that, he talked about an idea that I think really resonates with the Eastern person in me about the idea that these great teachers are like physicians that take the pulse of humankind and understand what the disease is and then prescribe the remedies. So Baha'u'llah claims that like the teachers before him, he has seen these problems of humanity and prescribed a remedy. Now, when Baha'u'llah began sharing his teachings in the 1800s, this was in the Middle East, he was immediately persecuted, especially by the Islamic religion, because he taught ideas, as you see, that are very different in some ways. For example, the independent investigation of truth, the lack of clergy, the equality of women and men, those were ideas that were very different from what was being taught at the time. So Baha'u'llah spent more than 40 years in exile, in imprisonment. He was tortured, poisoned, outcast, and stoned over these 40 years. And this is very similar to what happened to great teachers in the past as well. And I think the positive aspect of that is, despite all of that, during those 40 years, he revealed over 100 books, including he even wrote letters to each of the kings and rulers of the world. And he attracted a wide variety of people from different backgrounds, philosophies, and traditions to try to understand his teachings and work together. Okay, so I'll stop there. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions, try to answer any questions, and after that we could play the documentary if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So who is going to decide the science and the religions in contradiction and revise the teachings?
No, that's great. So The Baha'i faith has a sort of fundamental set of teachings, like I said, that are already written down. And if you read them, there's nothing in them that talks about specific scientific matters, necessarily. They really talk more about principles of how human beings should be. You know, a lot about virtues, about principles of equality, and so forth. So first, I don't think there's a lot of danger of, for example, science now coming to some conclusion that would contradict something directly in the Baha'i writings. But I think the main thing, again, is that we come together consultatively. So, for example, one of my good friends, he's a great scientist at Stanford, he's also a Baha'i. And he takes what he reads in the Baha'i writings, and he takes what he sees in science, and he tries to balance them together. I think the Baha'i writings inform his science, and when he learns something new in science that's not in the Baha'i writings, he's very, very, confident and happy about it. And if ever I've seen him sort of run into something that he's not sure about, he, takes a very honest step back and tries to evaluate what's going on and consults with others. But again, there's nothing really specific in the Baha'i writings that says, for example, I don't know, that atoms don't exist, right? There's nothing of that sort that you would necessarily have an issue with. But I think this statement is especially important when we evaluate when human beings add things to religion, or when we add our own interpretation. So, for example, we know in history that the Catholic Church was very against the emergence of science in the Middle Ages, and really did a lot of over-interpretation of the writings of Christianity to say that, no, science is wrong, it's bad, the world is flat, and things of that sort. So it was abusive, in a sense, of authority of how to interpret religion. So I think these statements are supposed to help us in our interpretation to be careful and balanced as we move forward in how we look at religion and what it tells us.
If the science is advanced, the human begin to change their own DNA genomics.
Right.
Is that still a human? Is that still unity?
That's a good question. So I don't know. I think that's something for humanity to try to come to together, because we've seen that issue come up really recently, right, with the use of CRISPR, and I think we have enough people who are very scientifically minded, who, if they were to use spiritual principles, right, because I think it's more about using principles, like, is this harmful to the good of humanity, right? How might it be harmful? Is it harmful today? Is it harmful tomorrow? Right? To be able to have not just a short-term view on, I want more publications, or I want to help people right now, but what is the sort of plan for humanity's long-term future? It gives you a spiritual perspective on how to approach science. Does that make sense? That's my understanding, but I would, I think, again, that's my understanding, and part of the Baha'i faith is talking with other people who know more, and I would love to hear your understanding later as well. Yeah.
I'm a Chinese. I born in Wuhan. Have you been to Wuhan?
I've been to Wuhan.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
last year.
That's my hometown. But I have been here long time, near 30 years. I come here in 1991. So I'm Chinese, but I still don't know a lot things in China right now. You said you open the canals in China are open. I want to know how is the Baha'i faith in China right now? The government is still control or punishment like other religion, or is it better? Is it more open?
Yeah.
Can you do openly in China?
So I'll give my best understanding from the time I was in China and from my interactions there recently. So my understanding of the Constitution of China is you've always been allowed to have your own religion and practice it. But I think one of the things that worries officials is that when people have large gatherings or large organization without sort of the observation of those officials. The Baha'i faith has a principle that whenever you go to a country, even if it's difficult, that you obey the laws of that country. And the reasoning behind that is because in the long term you want to promote unity, right? Even in the short term, but you want to have unity even with people that may not be very kind to you or people that might not understand you. So the Baha'i faith always has this idea of obeying the government, and I think over many years the government has recognized that. And so there's been I think a consultation, informal consultation, that the Baha'is have themselves thought and discussed with the government that if we were to have small gatherings, where we practice as individuals or small groups, and we do the kinds of core activities that I mentioned here, like study circles, devotionals, children's classes, that would be okay. And when I was in China, I had the chance to meet some officials about that too, and frequently met with them to let them know these are the activities we're doing, and they were very happy with it. So there were no problems.
Okay.
I've also met, scholars. I think Gao Rongqi showed the books that were here. So in the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and different universities, I worked at Beida for about 5 years. So I've met with scholars that have been researching the Baha'i faith. They visited to the United States, they visited to Haifa, which is where the Baha'i World Center is. And they have also a very positive view of what the Baha'i faith is, what it does in China. I don't know the exact source, but I think there's a blue book of religions in China. And in it they mentioned that the Baha'i faith was one of the religions that the Chinese people should look at as a religion of the future. So all in all, it's very positive in that sense.
Thank you. Sure.
Do they have like a church or temple or something like that?
Yeah, so in the Baha'i faith has an idea that I think especially once a community gets large enough, that they would have something like a house of worship or a temple, but that in addition to the religious, spiritual prayer aspect, that it would also have different institutions surrounding it. So there would be, for example, a hospital, an orphanage, library, and so forth, these different institutions. That eventually, humanity would have many of these. Right now, all over the world in the Baha'i faith, there's, I know in every continent, there's one of these houses of worship. I wish I had pictures. They're very beautiful and nice, and they're really supported by the local people. And again, as more people have capacity to do these sort of society-building exercises, then they'll build more of these houses of worship.
我用中文说哈，
当然，
你可以用英语回答。
他好厉害，听得懂。
俩能听懂。就是我自己哈，就是听说巴哈伊呢是在国内的时候，大概10年前，中国有个很有名的企业家叫潘石屹，房地产商哈，他和他的夫人都是巴哈伊。那时候觉得巴哈伊很神秘，不知道到底是什么东西哈。然后后来，其实我第2次接触就是通过高荣。高荣给我介绍的那个蔡德贵教授，那我也给他出了一本书，书名就是晚清民初的新文化运动和巴哈伊信仰，和巴哈伊文明和什么表示，就是介绍了这个巴哈伊是怎么样在晚清的时候进入中国的，以及怎么样对中国的新文化运动产生了影响。那么通过这本书呢，我对巴哈伊的也就是有了一个很粗浅的一个了解吧。然后刚才您的这个讲的这个呢，我觉得就是比较系统化。但是我自己还是觉得比较模糊在哪呢？就是巴哈伊就是作为一个信仰，我觉得它跟别的信仰一样，它都是给你描画了一个就是最后要实现的那么一个美好的世界，那个大同世界哈。但是它不一样的是。它没有像别的宗教那样给你一个很清楚的一个路径，你要这样做，然后你不能那样做。然后别的宗教好像这些东西都很清楚。那么在巴哈伊看来，怎么样才能实现这个最后的大同社会呢？是认为我们每个人都向善，每个人都去我们都去团结，都去以爱心来对待他人，最后这个变化就会自然而然的产生吗？
So that's a wonderful question, and you know, it's one of those things that Baha'is don't talk a lot about just because I think they forget because they have so many other things to talk about. So, you know, in China, how the government every 5 years or so has a 5-year plan. So the Baha'i Faith has a world administration, and at the top of that world administration there's an international House of Justice. We call it Universal House of Justice. And they're responsible for setting plans for the Baha'is of the world about how to basically achieve world peace. And not just every 5 years, but frequently, they're writing to the Baha'is of the world. We just got a message, I think, 2 days ago, about various aspects, given where the world is, about what we have to do exactly. So there's that Universal House of Justice that does that. Then each country, like the United States, for example, has a National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. That National Assembly also takes what the House of Justice does and helps translate for more local plans of action at the national level. And then the local spiritual assemblies, for example in Palo Alto there's one, in San Francisco, etc., they further take that plan and then make it operational. And every 19 days, the Baha'is have, for example, a community gathering called a 19-day feast. It's at those types of gatherings, as a bare minimum, that we read those plans, that we consult as a community together, we decide what actions help to meet the goals of those plans, and we try to systematic action is very important in the Baha'i Faith, because if it was just big ideas, it would be almost useless. I mean, it would be beautiful, but useless. So the Baha'is really are trying to be very systematic, and not just themselves, but inviting other people in society to work together towards these goals. For a talk like this, it's too short probably to bring up, but you know, if you want to talk about details of, for example, what we're doing in these few months, we'd be really happy to share that with you.
Sorry, so one more.
Yeah.
那个巴哈伊说怎么看待现在目前的这个社会，像 Trump 啊，包括世界上就是这个越来越 divisive 是吧？ 对，怎么看待？他的对策是什么？
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question too. So the Baha'i Faith, very early on, not just in these last few years where things seem to be really difficult, but very early on has writings about the stages that humanity would go through before it got to this beautiful age of peace and maturity. An analogy that it uses is that it talks about humanity was like a child growing up through different stages, but now is at the stage of adolescence, like a teenager. And a teenager has very strong physical body, just like humanity today is now very strong, or growing stronger and stronger in technology and material strength, but still has an immature set of ideas about how to use that body, right? How to use that technology and those materials resources. So the Baha'i Faith talks about, and this is also reflected in the writings of historians that studied past religions, that with the rise of the new world, as you know, we also see good things. We see that human beings are starting to realize they're members of one planet, of one race. That didn't exist 100 years ago. We didn't even have the science to really be able to say that. We now have so many more organizations that are working together. We have now universal education in most parts of the world. So there's all these good things happening. But while those good things are happening, this integration of society is accompanied by a disintegration of society. That disintegration of society is because humanity still uses old ideas to try to operate in this, you know, vastly changing world. So as long as we think, no, I just care about my people, not your people, we'll never be able to solve environmental problems. As economists, we know that, because you have to think of the common good when you think of environmental problems. We can't solve terrorism, we can't solve cybersecurity issues unless we have, you know, a sense of unity. So basically the world is going to go through a lot of difficulties. It's also going to continue to improve in a lot of ways. Those two processes will be simultaneous. And the difficulties of the world, as they get deeper and deeper, will make people start to wake up and think, what can we do differently? Maybe radically differently than what I thought before. And that is hopefully a time for awakening people to send them more towards the integrative process. What I said is very general, but there's also very specific writings, for example, about the United States. What will be the main specific problems that the United States goes through? There was a book written in the 1920s that talks about 3 main problems of the United States: racism, corruption in political and business affairs, and the laxity of morals. And we can see those 3 things are still getting even worse today. So the Baha'i Faith talks in detail about how to address each of those issues. I'm sorry, you had a question.
我就想，那个巴哈伊提到罪的问题，人的罪的问题，因为他提到原罪吗？
对，所以罪 the sin, right? If you look at the original meaning, it means when you're shooting an arrow with a bow, it means you missed the mark. So that's the meaning of sin. You were shooting at a target and you missed. Do you know what I mean? So even the original meaning of sin, if you were to miss a mark, what would you do? You try again, right? If you have a shortcoming or a mistake that you make, you try again. You try to do better. The Baha'i Faith's idea of sin is very much like that. We all have faults. We all have shortcomings. No one is perfect.
You were born in fault. That Baha'i say that you was born in fault.
So this is a great question. So in China, there was always a debate, right? People are born good or they're born bad, right?
What about I want to know what Baha'i say?
Yeah, the Baha'i Faith gives let me give it it kind of says both, and let me explain why. Why both?
Or does it say they agree 2 different ways?
Yeah.
You born sin or you were not born with sin?
So let me explain. There's a very good analogy that I think can help. The Baha'i Faith says that man is like a mine, rich in gems. So if you go into a mine, it's like a cave. It's very dark, it's cold, it's wet. But inside of there are gems. Very beautiful things, right? But to get them out, you have to dig. In the Baha'i Faith, that digging is education. So if you go to a baby, right, somebody who's very young, of course they have bad behavior, right? They can be selfish. If you have food, I'll take your food, right? They'll cry, they'll be unhappy. And that's there. We all have a part of ourself that's an animal self, kind of a lower self.
You said because this is caused by the gems inside.
By the physical part of our body. We have a physical side, a material side, and the material physical side has immediate things that I want, right? I have impatience, I have anger, I have sadness. All these are related to my physical body. But at the same time, even when you're a baby, you have a higher self, you have a soul. You have virtues that are in there in your heart. And if you get the right education, gradually that higher part of you grows stronger and stronger, and it dominates the lower part, right? So the idea of the Baha'i Faith is that through education, you can increase your moral virtues, your capacity, which are already part of you. You are noble, you have good in you. As you bring that out, it can control the lower self. It can control the unhappiness, the impatience, the anger, the frustration. So you always have both sides, but it depends the choices you make of how to bring out the better side. Is that?
I'm still confused on
Yeah.
why the same exit.
So in the Baha'i
Because
Faith,
the physical body?
yeah, because
But
of
where does it come from?
where does the physical body come from?
Yeah, so the physical body is not
Who
bad.
bring the sins?
Yeah, so let me
to the
explain.
human?
In the Baha'i faith, there's no idea that evil exists for sure. So let me explain.
They
Light,
talk about evil, the Baha'i way, and talk
Yeah.
about the evil.
right, they do talk about evil. So evil is the lack of good. When good is missing, you have evil. So light and darkness are two things, right? Light and darkness. Darkness is when there's no light. But darkness by itself is not something. It exists, but it has what we call in philosophy a negative existence. It doesn't exist by itself. It exists because it's when something else is missing. So the same way when our physical body doesn't have the virtues to guide it, right, then by itself it can do negative things. So for example, if I have a knife, I can use it to hurt someone, or I can use it as a doctor to do surgery, right? It's the same object, but my choice of how I decide to use it makes it good or bad. So all of the things about the human being and good and bad is related to, with my higher self and my lower self, how do I choose to do things? But evil is not something that exists by itself. Everything is good and for a good purpose, but because I have choices, I can use it for a bad purpose. Does that make sense? And please, everyone else, feel free.
我想跟大家分享几句我对这个问题的理解哈，就是刚刚这个问题是就是这个原罪的问题，这基督教提到人有原罪，那这个巴哈伊信仰对这个原罪问题有什么理解？这个按照我对巴哈伊教导的理解，就是人是有双重性的。就是人性是有两个方面的，一方面我们是有我们动物的一面，物质的一面；另一方面我们也有精神的和高尚的一面。那这个因为有动物的一面，那就是说我们就跟和动物一样，受制于很多这个物质世界的一个控制。我不能不睡觉，我困了我就要去睡觉。对吧？这个是我没办法控制的，是我饿了我就得去吃饭，这是这个动物的这个一面。那这个因为我们有动物的一面，我会有一些，比如说嫉妒。我看到别人比我好，我心里会有嫉妒，我会有贪心，我会有自私，这些的情感都是很自然的，因为我是有动物的一面。这个就是我写这本书的时候，就是这些东西是我这么多年培养教育孩子，跟他一起学习、一起思考，这个我从这个巴哈伊学习中得到的，就对我帮助很大，对我的孩子帮助也很大。第一个，因为我承认我有动物的一面，那这个动物的一面呢，那我有嫉妒的心情的时候。我很自私的时候，或者孩子有这种负面的情感的时候，我能够首先我能够很坦然的接受，另外一个呢，我让我的孩子也很坦然的接受自己的这一面，另一方面呢，同时我又告诉孩子，我们呢还有精神的一面，还有高尚的一面。那高尚的一面呢，精神一面呢，就是这个爱，这个乐于助人，要心胸开阔，要思想开阔开明。要有独立思考，这都是高尚的精神的一面。那么我们作为一个，而且就下一句就是，我要告诉孩子，那人生的目的就是每天不断的去怎么尽自己最大的努力，尽量的让高尚的一面来战胜这个低级的一面，这个负面的东西。就像Prashant刚刚讲的，所以怎么去？就是人生是一个富矿，就巴哈伊教导是非常重视教育，就是这个很多无知是很多，这个一个可 可以错误和的恶的一个来源。所以要教育，从孩子开始就要教育他，那要把这个很好的美的东西、好的东西，而且要扩大什么是美的东西，什么是好的东西。那是吧？在原来的基础上，爱、乐于助人是好的东西，思想开明、包容，这也是好的东西，这更高一层意义上的好的东西。这个包容包括宗教的包容。这个刚刚我一直在讲的，这个巴哈伊对不同宗教，我们接受所有的这个先知这个最基本的教义都是好的，这个包容的，所以呢，就是这样子呢，所以就是这是我的理解，我对这个原罪的理解，所谓的。那今天呢没有时间呢讲到这个问题。其实，巴哈伊这个著作当中有很多，就有很多著作，其中包括一个，我们刚刚讲阿卜杜巴哈，就是刚刚和上也提到，是巴哈伊信仰中非常重要的一个人物。他写的，他在20世纪初，1912年左右好像。就第一次刚刚从监狱出来，他一终生都被关在这个好像德黑兰或者阿卡那个以色列的那个阿卡监狱当中，他一被放出来，已经是60、70岁的高龄，立刻搭上了轮船，去了欧洲巴黎、英国，后来到了美国，从纽约一直还来了三藩市，还在1912年10月多少号我忘了，斯坦福做了演讲，在三藩市做了好几个演讲。那他到处做演讲，其中在有一叫巴黎谈话 （Paris Talk），就是他在整个巴黎期间给的欧洲期间给的很多演讲都在里面。那他就人问了很多问题，就你刚刚现在问到这个问题，绝对的在里面，大家就问了很多问题，就有关于原来。基督教和这个，特别是关于基督教和伊斯兰教的问题，就这些宗教的发展，我们今天没有时间一一再去讲。他这个阿卜杜巴哈还有一本书叫《以答之问》，就是 Some Answered Question。这个呢是英国的一个，最初是美国出生的，后来到了英国，一个女士去了海法。就是以色列的阿卡那边，他就待在那边待了将近2年的时间，就每一天，就一有时间他就去向阿卜杜巴哈问问题，就问了好多的问题，就包括就比如说这个问题，就是比如，那就一一的阿卜杜巴哈给他一一的给出了一个解答，比如说。你说在圣经里面提到的这个亚当、夏娃和这个蛇吃禁果是什么意思？他的怎么去理解这个东西？那其实这个呢是等于说这个基督教里面的原罪，是吧？就从这里出来的，就很有意思，很多东西就是对我们理解这个宗教之间的这个承传和如何去理解这个。圣经啊，这个还有伊斯兰教这些东西，这个对我们理解这些非常有帮助。就简单的说一句，就很多，就是很多这个圣经啊，就还有还有很多一些这些书上的一些教义、一些话，其实很多是比喻的，是带比喻的含义的。我们不能就完完全全从字面去理解。那比如说这个人在描述，就是我们在描述一个精神的一个问题的时候，有的时候一定要用这个物质的东西来这个现象来描写。比如说，我说这个爱情，这爱情其实是一种精神上的一个东西，一个层面的东西。比如说我太幸福了，我太高兴了，那我的心飞了出来。我的心好像这个在漂浮，那这个时候，你这个心会飘吗？你的心会跳出来吗？不会。当我们用这个物质的比喻来描述一个精神的一个现象， 所以很多这个一些历史著作，就包括圣经啊、古兰经里面的很多的书，有的时候一些话语，其实要从这个角度去理解。
我就想最好奇一个问题，我就不问了。那个巴哈伊那个信仰，他刚才提到了罪啊，我就不想，我再不想问是怎么来的了。我现在最感兴趣的是巴哈伊那个信仰，他是怎么战胜这个罪的？
怎么战胜这个罪？
比如说你比如人明明知道做这个事情不好，他知道是个罪，但是就是胜不过，就是还会继续犯。
我
这个是很普遍的，就是说明明知道这个肉体，刚才他说了physical嘛，明明知道有这个罪，但是就是胜不过。他是靠那个信仰，他是靠什么来胜过这个罪，然后实现？我对他的这个观点很感兴趣，就是说他接受一切的那种信仰，比如说伊斯兰教、基督教，他都就是说那他的那个理想很美好，就是说世界大同，就是人人都向善。他是怎么样战胜罪，然后就是让人人都向善的，就是怎么可以生活这个罪，让人变得越来越好。
这个其实也
就是因为那个圣经里面有一句话嘛，我明明我知道我有罪，就是保罗说的，要我做的我不去做，我心里不做的我偏要去做，我真的苦啊！谁能救我脱离这取死的肉体，就是取死的那种physical的body？谁能救我？就是他怎么样去战胜？
这个有些刚刚跟这位女士问的问题，就是具体的巴哈伊如何实现这个美好的理想来推进社会的发展，其实都是有
别人的理想，
的。
所有的人的理想都是，大多数的人的理想都是很好的，那美好的社会、善良的社会，但是怎么样去做到？
对这个呢，我先说一下，我先简单说一下。
个体变得越来越好，是吧？
我先简单说一下我的非常浅显的理解，然后接下来也希望Prashant也加入，加一下你的理解，还有其在座的大家都有什么理解一起畅所欲言。我的理解就是教育，这个教育呢通过，所以我们为什么这个巴哈伊的这个很多现实的步骤当中，其中就包括在的每一个社区当中，在社区当中给从小孩开始，从3、4岁就开始给他们进行爱的教育，就是人是要接近教育有很多方面的教育，一个是比如说是科学教育，是吧？另一方面是精神的教育，就人是需要有精神的教育的。那要从儿童开始，就儿童期就要不断的引导他们，要逐渐的这个得到这个来提升他们。这个我现在加一句，就是关于在中国这个我近几年回国，在中国的特别很多大城市都有大量的儿童班、青少年班，还有成人大人的就是这个
巴哈伊那个信仰上面提到的就是教育。
他对教育这个是非常重视，但是然后另外一个当然在教育之外，还要就是通过祈祷、祷告啊什么，得到神圣的这个帮助。有的时候靠自己可能做不了的事情，可能需要靠得到一个神圣力量来帮助自己来战胜自己的动物性的一面。是要战胜自己动物性的一面是非常非常的难的，这点我是有亲身的体会。所以好，现在请那个Prashant。
So that's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't have a complete answer because I think everybody is working on that. But I think what Rebecca said, there are tools in religion that are supposed to help you when you use those tools. So one of them, she said, is prayer. And prayer is like communication with something divine. And you're asking for help to change yourself. And I think, in the books that I mentioned, the study circles, there's a whole unit on prayer.
Pray to God.
Pray to God, and God being an unknowable.
What kind of God? That Baha'is believe.
That the God in Baha'i belief is unknowable, but you can still communicate through these prayers that these great teachers bring, which are in a very beautiful particular language that speak to the dynamic of your soul. For example, there's a beautiful prayer, I can say it for you. It says, "O God, refresh and gladden my spirit, purify my heart."
Who's Baha'is God? Who's Baha'is God?
Baha'is God is everybody's God, is the unknowable God that is the creator of this universe, of the creator of all things. And so I think that unknowable God, through these great teachers, brings some concrete actions that you can do. So for example, the idea of studying the writings. Baha'is every morning and every evening read at least one sentence of a Baha'i writing. And those sentences, as you read them in the morning, they help you to think about how I should start the day. And as you read them in the evening, they help you reflect on how your day went. And they contain principles that help to push you in the right direction to change, right? So for example, a very simple one is truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. So truthfulness is like the foundation of a building, and the building is the other human virtues. So as you think about that writing, as I think about it, I think, if I want to be kind, if I want to be loving, if I want to be just, I need truthfulness, right? So it helps me see the relationship between different virtues and how I need to think about them, right? So the next time I maybe want to tell a little lie, right, I think about what am I going to lose when I'm not truthful, right? I'm going to lose my chance to learn other virtues. I'm going to lose my chance to be successful in a spiritual way as well as material way. So these Baha'i writings, just like the writings of all religions, they contain truth that helps to guide you to understand the spiritual reality. When you understand that spiritual reality, then you can improve much more. It's like when a child doesn't know how to play violin, but as they gradually learn about music and violin, eventually they become a master at it. And I think all of us, when we hear these beautiful ideas of religion, we think, oh, those are very nice, but I know them, right? Like I know how to be good, I know how to be kind, but I don't think we really do. I don't, right? I think we learn these spiritual writings because they help teach us gradually how do we do these things, how do we change.
Is there any principle in Baha'i that we should not challenge, we should not question? Like there's one God. Can I China saying there should be two gods, one male, one female?
So the Baha'i faith has 19 months in a calendar, and those 19 months are each named after a quality of God. And one of the months is called questions. So questions is a fundamental aspect of the Baha'i faith. You should always be looking with your own eyes. You should never be blindly accepting anything. But one of the distinctions is in our society, sometimes when we ask a question, we stand high and we say, I don't think that's true. Why is that the way it is? That kind of question in the Baha'i spirit is not the best spirit, right? The better spirit is to ask, why is that the way it is? To ask in a spirit of inquiry. So if you're really questioning to understand, any question is fine in the Baha'i faith. Any question at all. In fact, it's very encouraged.
What if like we disagree with the administrative, you say someone listen specific messages about what the guidance wants you to do, let's say in the United States. What if someone disagree with that?
Yeah.
Can they like how would they, is there a process to challenge it, or is it okay I just quit?
It's a great question. I think so the society we live in now is really used to thinking in a certain way about challenging things, about conflict, about getting my due rights, etc. the Baha'i faith would just look at it slightly differently. So if an institution like the National Assembly said we should do X, Y, Z, and you have a different idea, you don't agree, you can definitely go through very clear channels and consult, and even ask the Universal House of Justice at the higher level and consult with them, and they respond to every letter. And ask in a spirit of inquiry and consultation and trying to make things better, to see if things can change or be done differently, or to receive an explanation to help you understand why things are being done the way they are. So it's very much two ways in terms of communication. But again, the spirit is not one of conflict, but one of cooperation and understanding and trying to build unity together.
Can you give us an example? You say emotional or spiritual solutions to economic problems.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example? Let's say I have a friend who wants to do a startup, he doesn't have money.
Yeah.
What's his spiritual solution to this kind of economic problem?
Oh, to that one, can I? Okay. So, well, I mean, you know, if somebody wants to do something very good, right? They want to do a startup that would, and they don't have any money. I think that there would have to be a spiritual principle behind any way of that guy getting started. So for example, he could receive money from somebody else, but it would be because somebody else was generous, right? Unless they tied a lot of strings, and then in the long term that wouldn't work, right? But you would need either generosity, or maybe you need to have government programs, right, that really look after projects that are for the betterment of society, a long-term betterment, and really take those into account. So you need to have a very well-informed, efficient, just type of government agency, right? Those are all spiritual principles that we need to underlie that agency. Just other examples, you know, when you have the extremes of poverty and wealth that we have in the world today, you need, and we're starting to see a little bit, but we need much more, people who already have a lot of money to, of their own accord, to want to give money to the people that are poor, and they're active, not just give them money, but to support activities that would lead to their flourishing, right? If you were just to try all by itself only to force people, that wouldn't work. You need to have people of their own volition who are successful want to give back, and that requires a spiritual education. Those are different examples.
What is Baha'is view on family man-woman relationship?
Yeah, so this is really important. So in the Baha'i faith it says that men and women have been and always are equal under the sight of God. And it gives an analogy of a bird with two wings, a left wing and a right wing, and that both wings have to be equally strong for the bird to fly. It couldn't be that one wing is weaker. And that being said, the two wings are different, right? They have the left, you don't have two left wings, you don't have two right wings. That would be problematic. So they may have different roles in the family, but the roles are through consultation again, that you discuss and decide as a family what those roles should be. But it's very clear in the Baha'i writings that women need to be at the highest level of every profession. So Abdul Baha says we will not have world peace until women are equal as men in all of these different professions.
How about marriage? What is the view of marriage in
They can separate? The husband and wife can separate?
They can. Marriage is encouraged as a basic unit of human society. You decide and choose whether you want to get married or not. You don't have to. If you do want to separate, there are specific kind of laws around that. So for example, unless there's a very dangerous situation, usually you have like a year of patience before you fully separate, if in that year of patience you want to reconcile. There's different aspects like that. In general, there's not a lot of laws in the Baha'i faith because it tries to stay away from telling people what to do exactly. But because humanity is at a different stage of maturity, it's not like 1,000 years ago where where we weren't educated. Now we're all getting education, we're all able to think. So it gives a minimum number of laws and a lot of spiritual principles for how to make decisions, such as about family and about equality. Thank you so much. I feel very honored to be here again. Look forward to talking to you more afterwards. I don't think we have time for that documentary, but I can leave it with Rebecca or some of you, and then you can watch it.
Up to you guys. There's a short film. You guys want to watch it?
It's 50 minutes, so that might be. I'll let you decide without any pressure.
哦呀，我可以把这个连接发给大家，自己可以看，有中文的也有英文的。那你等一下把你的 email 或者那个 WeChat 给我，我可以发给你。或者你给那个王俊把你的联系方式给他，我把那个联系给。我想再加一句哈，总结一句，就是刚刚这位女士问，就是这个巴哈伊信仰中的上帝是谁？是什么上帝是谁是上帝？上帝是什么样的？我不知道。巴哈伊教导讲得非常清楚 ，is unknowable。这个上帝是我们不可知的。但是我想说的一句话就是，巴哈伊信仰中的上帝就是基督教信仰中的上帝，就是伊斯兰教信仰中的上帝，也是那个佛教信仰中的上帝。That's it. OK。
那这有一个问题了，佛教是不信神。
OK， 那刚刚说错了。对，佛教这个当然有一个行业说是佛教是不信神，另外如果我们不是。
基督教的神它是三位一体的神，跟那个伊斯兰的神也不一样。
这些都对这个第一个关于基督教是有神的反对权。
那不跟多神教一样？
第一个就是对
我是这样理解的，
佛教
要神的话，就全部归到巴哈伊的神那里去。
Well, can I say one thing really quickly? I think this was one of the most. I came from a Hindu background. I studied some Buddhism. I grew up in a Christian culture. I grew up in Missouri. So my friends would, for example, tell me, if you don't believe in Jesus, you go to hell. And I thought, my mother, she's Hindu. She prays 2 hours a day. There's no way God is going to send her to hell. There's no way. She's so nice and kind, right? So I think one of the most exciting things for me in the Baha'i faith was to ask the questions you just asked and all of you just asked, and to explore in those writings how the Baha'i faith answers them, and then go to the other religious texts, to go to the Bible, to go to the Quran, to go to the Fuqing and everything, and read them, and see the harmony between them. I spent at least 1 year of my time at Stanford when I was an undergraduate not going to class, but just doing that. So I spent a lot of studying on it, and I think it's a very worthwhile endeavor. I think Rebecca wants to say, there are many, many, many answers there in the Baha'i writings that I think would make you very happy when you read them.
So actually, 你好，我是有一个补充，就是做关于这个回答，就是究竟说的最后这个 individual God 是谁的嘛？其实说得很清楚嘛，五教同源。我们看到谁是神，他就是你的神了。我看到的是佛祖，他就是我的神了。他看到的是阿拉，这就是他的神了。所以没有名字，就是我们心中的神，就是我们的神，就是他们的神。所有我们现在天天在打架的，其实就是好像你说英文，他说 Spanish， 对吧？那就是只是我们的因缘不同嘛，就是一种我们教育的环境不同，我能接受的环境是佛教，他能接受的环境是可兰教，对吗？可兰经是那个回教，所以就是环境不同，造出一种不同的因缘，去寻求不同的路径，但是最后那个终点是一样的，所以其实没有必要说，你叫什么名字？我大名和我小名不一样，就那么简单了。我的理解是这样的。
That's beautiful. I'll tell you a very funny story. I was studying history with my daughter. My daughter is studying about all the ancient civilizations, about India, about Mesopotamia, about Persia, everything. So in India, I know growing up that the gods are called devas. And the bad people, the demons, are called asuras. That's in Hinduism. Now in Zoroastrianism in Persia, it's the opposite. The good people are called asuras, and the bad people are called devas.
Just the name, right?
Yeah, they just switched the name because before there were tribes in Central Asia that were together, but they split and went different directions. They must have had some big disagreement. So they called the other one the bad thing, and themselves the good thing. And I think, we have to remember the history of religion is filled with things like this, right? There's not just the part that's beautiful from Shakyamuni or from Jesus or from Muhammad. There's lots of things that people added. For example, in the Quran, the early people who translated it into English were missionaries from Christianity. They decided to translate God as Allah, as the sound of the Arabic word. But really the translation is God. I mean, it's the exact same meaning, right? So it's just a decision. Then people later said, oh, but you believe in Allah and I believe in God. That's totally different, right? But it, like you said, it's language and it's circumstance. But that conception of what we believe in is the same conception, I believe.
How did you become a believer of
Yeah, in college, I had started studying about religion and philosophy already in my younger years, in junior high school, because I was very interested. I wanted to do two things. I wanted to know what's the purpose of my life and how can I help society advance. Those were two things I had as a youth. When I got to Stanford, I started studying about many different religions. My roommate was a Taoist. I studied more about Judaism and other religions. Finally, in my senior year of college, I found out about the Baha'i faith. And I started studying it like I studied other things. And the more I read through it and studied it, the more I saw this alignment between the religions, this oneness of religion. And eventually I thought that paradigm made a lot of sense to me, helped explain reality. So in college I became a Baha'i.
你在 Stanford 教什么？
我教教育。教育经济学
教育
so it's economics of education. So it's how to use economics to understand education, especially education policy in developing countries or large countries like China, India, Russia, United States. So if you want to find out if a teacher training policy works, right, then I go and I evaluate that. Or if you want to know how much students are learning in college, then I go evaluate that. And then using the data, I write up papers, I write up policies to give to the government.
那你这个我好奇一个问题啊，这个很多人诟病中国的改革开放里面有个最大的一个问题叫教育产业化，因为全世界的教育都不是赚钱的，在美国叫非盈利的，但是中国把教育都产业化的，你知道中国的补习班的产业是多少个亿？那你这个怎么看？我倒很好奇这个问题。
Wow, I think that deserves another talk. So, there's a big debate about public versus private education. Not just in China, but especially in the United States, it's a huge debate. People think private education could be good for many reasons. One, it doesn't use government resources, it uses family resources. Another reason is when you have more private education, you have more choice. There's also another idea where people think if you have private education, it makes public education work harder, so it becomes more efficient. People have done a lot of testing using data to see if these ideas are true. So it's definitely true through private education you have more choice, definitely. It's definitely true families can get extra education without the government paying for it. That can be good or bad because it increases inequality. But it frees the government budget. But one of the main arguments about whether it makes education more efficient, there's not good evidence that says private makes public more efficient. Sometimes you find a positive result of introducing private education, sometimes you find a negative result. So it's a big debate, and it's very political. And I could say more later if you want. Yeah. Thank you again very much. Thank you.